Good morning, gentlemen. It's a wonderful day, but it's not so wonderful in Ukraine, where the battle still is raging and the Russians haven't given up and the Ukrainians are trying to dislodge them. But let's examine what's happening at the moment. The Russians have made a tactical withdrawal from Kherson and they are now on the eastern side of the Dnieper, but they haven't given up and there's fighting on in the other regions of the east. And the Russians have struck in a very devastating manner. Half of Kiev, or even more than that, is under darkness. Temperatures are below zero. There is no heating oil. There are 8 million refugees floating around Europe. And Ukraine is saying that Russia is a terrorist state. The European Union is saying the same thing. But then let's accept one fact, that all these are one-sided tales. Nowhere in the world, India, Pakistan or China has called Russia a terrorist state. And the EU calling is irrelevant. I mean, it's very sad, but that is the actual fact. None of the African nations have gone and said that Russia is a terrorist state, or anybody in South America has said that Russia is a terrorist state, other than the EU. And the EU, as you know, militarily is a big zero. It's relying only on American might, and the Americans are fueling the flames of Ukraine's battle by instigating Ukraine to fight on, because in the American interest to keep fighting with Russia. Now these are the points which we must bear in mind when we see the total picture. What is the picture? The picture is that Zelensky was very keen to become part of the Western alliance, and he was egged on, rather goaded into it, by the Americans and the British. That's number one. I can understand the American point of view because they wanted to dominate Europe, create a phobia that Russia is the enemy, because there's an inherent fear in Eastern Europe of Russia because of their relations over many decades or even 1 or 2 centuries from the present time. But the UK, which is no longer a power, having been defeated in the Second World War by Germany, when I say defeated is, what were the repercussions of that war? Within 2 years, the British Empire got finished. So if that is not defeat, then what is defeat? That is number one. Then coming down to another point is that Ukraine has been shouting a lot about war crimes, vast graves, this thing, that thing, but who is responsible for it? Probably all this would not have happened if Ukraine had not made an attempt to join the EU or NATO. Now, everybody can say that anybody is free to join NATO. Fair enough, I agree. But then there was a promise made in 1992 by Bill Clinton to Boris Yeltsin, the Russian president, that NATO would not expand eastwards to the former states which were under the Russian or the Soviet sphere of influence. That is Poland, Bulgaria and all these countries, Estonia, Latvia, etc. But yet by 1998 they did precisely that. And then they thought now is the time to surround Russia totally and then try and finish Russia for the next 100 years. And they egged on a foolish man, Mr. Zelensky, to join up with them, with NATO, and become a frontline state against Russia. See, one thing is very clear. After the American thrashing or the defeats in Afghanistan and Vietnam, Americans, General Saab doesn't want to get involved in Ukraine. They're never going to intervene physically there in Ukraine. No way. But at the same time, the penchant for war is there. The American war machine needs something to do. And they've been feeding weapons, ammunition, billions of dollars into Ukraine to oppose Russia. Otherwise, by now, the Ukrainians would have been defeated. And in any case, the war would have been over and there would have been a solution, and that is the end of it. But the Americans never wanted a solution. They wanted their hegemony over Europe to continue, and that being the case, this war has continued. And nowhere have I seen that the Ukrainians are so powerful enough as to throw the Russians out of the entire Ukraine. It will not happen unless the Russians on their own decide what to do. Now the situation is the Russian demands are very clear. I think I've spelled out in earlier videos. that Ukraine must not be made a member of NATO, number one, and it should be out of the EU, and it should not be a threat to Russia. And these are the three demands which the Russians have. And by not accepting these demands, Zelensky has created a war for his people. What he has gained for it, I don't know. Ukraine is devastated, 8 million refugees. All their cities are having power cuts, power shortage, winter is on, no heating, and they're suffering casualties. Russians are also suffering casualties, but Ukraine, the effect is much more. And yet, Zelensky is keeping on talking, things like asking the United Nations to declare Russia a war criminal state. The EU says Russia is a terrorist state. I mean, you can keep talking any amount of things. Because until you have the muscle, it has no meaning. Now the Americans, as you all know, are wary of China, and Joe Biden had a meeting of 3 hours with the President Xi of China. Why? He's scared. He wants to accommodate with China. But he thinks he can get away. Rather, I would say that Biden thinks he can get away with Russia by creating Russia as an enemy. Now, in that being the case, what is going to happen next? That is the crucial question. The crucial question has an answer. And I have no doubt in my mind that the Russians are not going to give up. And the Americans are also playing with fire, egging on Zelensky. The crucial figure in this entire drama is Mr. Zelensky. And until this man is dealt with, I don't think there can be peace in this region. Zelensky was a comedian. I mean, he was a stage actor or something. I don't think he has any political acumen. He perhaps even doesn't know what it means to take 2 steps back and then 1 step forward, which is politics. He's banking on the Anglo-Saxons and the British and the Americans to help him out, and some of the other small European countries, which have got no meaning really, Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, have got no relevance at all. The 2 big nations, France and Germany, are not entirely on board with him. And then most of these countries are dependent on Russia for their oil and gas. And they are taking it. They have sanctions or no sanctions. Gas is flowing from Russia to Germany and France, including oil. And in the bargain, the loser is Ukraine. So one must be a realistic man, decide what is possible and what is not possible. I don't think Zelensky has any idea of what is happening. He's thinking the ultimate analysis, the Americans were going to win the bottle war and help him win the war. It's not going to happen that way. I'm afraid, gentlemen, I don't have anything more to add on this. The war is continuing and the Russians haven't given up. The Ukrainians are in a terrible state of affairs, and now it requires only one spark. And what is that spark? The Russian nuclear plant, the Ukrainian nuclear plant, which is earlier the Russian plants, could be the catalyst of an explosion. I wouldn't say an explosion, it will be an implosion to explode from inside. And in that case, Ukraine would be destroyed for the next 50 years. I don't know whether Zelensky has any idea about all this, because, I mean, he's just dancing like a puppet. What do the Americans say? You do this, then do it, I'll do it. And that is the danger. You always need a nationalist leader who can look after his people, who feels for his people, who doesn't drag his people into misery, and that is what Zelensky has done. Well, gentlemen, we'll watch this episode further with greater interest and see what Putin can do, what he has up his sleeve. I close now and hope all of you like and share this video, subscribe to it, and I close. Jai Hind.